It was a scorching afternoon in the heart of the city, the kind of heat that made the pavement shimmer with every passing car. The busy streets were alive with the usual chaos, honking horns, rushed footsteps, and the constant buzz of city life. Inside a motorcade of sleek, black cars, Donald Trump sat in his Cadillac One, the symbol of authority and power. As the motorcade moved smoothly through the crowded avenues, Trump was listening intently to a report from one of his advisors, his mind focused on the matters of the day. Yet, just as the hum of business and politics enveloped him, something unusual caught his eye. On the sidewalk, amidst the sea of pedestrians, stood a small, frail girl, no older than 10. Her clothes were worn and tattered, and in her hands, she clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Please help my family, we desperately need a miracle." The sign was hastily written, but the message was clear. Trump's attention was immediately drawn to her. He watched her closely, her wide, blue eyes scanning the passing cars, searching for something or someone to offer help. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hoodie faded and torn, but it was her eyes, full of hope yet shadowed with uncertainty, that stopped him in his tracks. Without a second thought, Trump leaned toward the window and gave a firm order to his security. "Stop the car," he commanded, his voice calm but resolute. The motorcade screeched to a halt, causing the trailing vehicles to jolt slightly. The sudden stop startled everyone inside, including the advisors and security personnel, who exchanged puzzled looks. "Sir, this area isn't safe. We should continue with the route," one of his bodyguards cautioned. But Trump wasn't swayed. His eyes never left the girl standing on the sidewalk. He turned to his team with unwavering determination. "I want to know that girl's story," he said. Without waiting for another word, he opened the door and stepped out into the street, his presence commanding attention, as curious onlookers quickly pulled out their phones to record the moment. What followed was a series of decisions that would not only change the girl's life but spark a movement that would resonate across the country. As Donald Trump stepped out of his motorcade, the air seemed to shift. The bustling, noisy city street, full of its usual commotion, now felt strangely still. The crowd around him, though startled, didn't dare move. Phones clicked, capturing the moment as Trump walked toward the young girl standing nervously by the sidewalk. She was barely 10 years old, her hands tightly gripping the tattered cardboard sign. As he approached, her wide eyes flickered with a mix of hope and fear. It wasn't every day that someone like him, the leader of the free world, stepped off a motorcade to stop and pay attention to someone like her. Trump crouched down to meet her gaze, softening his expression. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his voice calm and reassuring. The girl hesitated, her eyes darting to the security guard standing nearby, a look of uncertainty flashing across her face. She finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute, "My name is Lily." Her hands gripped the sign even harder, as if it was her only defense. Trump smiled slightly, his face sincere, and gave her a moment to find her words. "Why are you standing here, Lily?" he asked. His tone remained steady, but there was a genuine curiosity in his eyes. The young girl's face tightened as she bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. Her small body trembled, but her voice steadied as she began to speak. I just need someone to help my mom. She's very sick. We don't have a home. My dad died in the war," she said, the words tumbling out with a raw honesty that struck Trump deep. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, but there was an unmistakable strength in them, a strength that refused to break under the weight of her circumstances. Trump felt a pang in his chest. He hadn't been prepared for this. A child, barely more than a baby, bearing the weight of a broken family, a sick mother, and the loss of a father who had given everything. For a brief moment, he was silent, processing what Lily had just revealed. "Where did your dad serve?" he asked, his voice softening even more. "In the Middle East," Lily replied, her voice cracking. "He was a soldier. A hero." Her gaze turned distant for a second as she seemed to lose herself in the memory of her father. Trump's heart sank. He stood up slowly, his mind working fast. He knew the gravity of what she had just shared. Her father's sacrifice, one that many in the country didn't understand, had left Lily and her family in a place of unimaginable hardship. Trump's resolve hardened. He turned to his advisors, his expression firm. "Get the car ready. I want to see where Lily lives," he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. One of his bodyguards stepped forward, concern evident in his voice. "Sir, this is extremely dangerous. We can't guarantee your safety in that area." Trump shot him a sharp look, his gaze unwavering. "If a child can stand on a busy street asking for help, then I can risk going to where they live." His words left no room for doubt. "If you're afraid, feel free to leave." The bodyguard hesitated for only a moment before nodding, acknowledging that there would be no stopping Trump's decision. Trump's eyes turned back to Lily, who was watching him with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Lead the way, Lily. Let's go meet your mother." And with that, the motorcade, usually gliding smoothly through the streets of cities filled with power and influence, slowly began to maneuver through streets that were far removed from luxury and opulence. The scenery changed rapidly. The tall glass buildings and luxury stores gave way to crumbling brick homes, sagging roofs, and narrow, litter-strewn alleyways. Inside the car, Lily sat quietly beside Trump, her small hands tightly clenched in her lap. The once invincible businessman now found himself fully aware of the magnitude of what he was about to face. The road ahead wasn't just about helping one little girl, it was about confronting a reality that many had long turned away from. As the car made its way through the dilapidated neighborhood, Lily pointed toward a makeshift house at the end of a narrow alley. "We're almost there, Mr. Trump," she said quietly, the courage in her voice not matching the fear in her eyes. Trump nodded, his brow furrowing as the car rolled to a stop in front of a house that seemed to stand on the brink of collapse. It was clear now, this wasn't just about one family. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change the course of more lives than just Lily's. As Donald Trump stepped out of the sleek Cadillac one, the weight of the decision settled into his bones. The air in the narrow alley seemed to thicken with anticipation, and the distant hum of the city, so familiar and comforting to him, felt miles away. He was no longer surrounded by the comforts of his typical life, no plush offices, no political discussions, no elite gatherings. Now, he was standing in front of a makeshift home in the heart of a broken community, surrounded by crumbling buildings, shattered dreams, and children whose eyes reflected a harsh truth: they had been forgotten. But Trump wasn't one to shy away from the hard truths. He wasn't here to just look around and nod his head sympathetically. He was here because Lily, a little girl who should have been playing with dolls or dreaming about her future, had asked him for help. And now, standing in the shadows of a broken family, Trump was determined to be the person who would make a difference, not just for Lily, but for everyone who was living in the same desperate circumstances. He wasn't here to offer empty promises or photo ops. This was real. And the pain he saw in Lily's eyes was enough to ignite something deep inside him. As he entered the rundown home, the dim light inside felt suffocating. The room was small, cramped, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. Trump's eyes immediately fell on Lily's mother, a frail woman lying on a small bed in the corner. Her face was drawn and pale, her body frail with illness, but it was the quiet strength in her gaze that caught his attention. She had seen the worst life could throw at her and was still standing, just barely. "Mom, this is Mr. Trump. He's here to help us," Lily's voice cracked, but there was a flicker of hope in it. It was the kind of hope that only children can carry, even when everything around them is falling apart. The woman, exhausted and broken, looked up with uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't been promised anything by anyone for a long time. She had been left to survive, and even the idea of someone coming to help her was difficult to believe. Trump knelt beside her, extending a hand, his voice steady and calm. "You don't need to say anything," he reassured her. "Lily did an incredible job bringing me here. Now it's my turn to fight for both of you." The weight of his words carried with them an undeniable sincerity. He wasn't just speaking for the cameras or trying to score political points, he was speaking from a place of genuine resolve. Lily's mother's lips trembled, but no words came out. She didn't know what to say. She had lost so much, and the idea that someone as powerful as Trump would show up at her doorstep felt like a dream. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know what to say." Trump gave her a steady, compassionate look. "You don't have to say anything," he said again, his voice firm yet kind. "Your husband gave his life for this country. The least I can do is make sure that you and your daughter get the help you need." He glanced around the room, taking in the crumbling walls, the broken furniture, and the tired faces of the children who sat silently in the corners. The situation was dire. These weren't just people living in poverty, they were people who had been abandoned by society, left behind in the wake of the sacrifices made by their loved ones. Trump's mind raced as he processed the magnitude of what he was seeing. This wasn't just one family's tragedy. This was the reality for countless other families who had served their country, only to be left to fend for themselves when the battles ended. "I need a full report on this family's situation immediately," Trump instructed his team, his voice cutting through the silence. "Her mother's health must be evaluated tonight." The urgency in his tone was palpable. His advisors and security personnel exchanged uneasy glances. "Sir, this is a dangerous area," one of them warned. "We shouldn't stay here too long." But Trump wasn't interested in hearing about danger. "She doesn't need promises. She needs action," he shot back, his tone unwavering. "I'm not leaving until I know that both of them are going to get the help they need." Trump turned to Lily, kneeling down in front of her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Lily, you've done something incredibly brave. You've been fighting for your mom, and now it's my turn to fight for both of you." He paused, looking at her with a deep sense of respect. The words he spoke weren't just for Lily, they were for every person in that room who had been forgotten, for every family who had been left to struggle in silence. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle of the motorcade and the sudden appearance of Trump in the slums. The people watched with cautious optimism, their eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and hope. Trump stood tall, his voice carrying with authority as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't just the story of one family," he said firmly. "This is the story of thousands of families who have been left behind. We are going to change that. Starting today." The crowd, hesitant at first, began to stir. Applause erupted, quiet at first but growing stronger as the reality of what Trump had promised settled in. This wasn't just an empty statement, it was a call to action. Trump's words sparked something in the hearts of the people who had long been ignored. The promise of change, of help that wasn't just a temporary fix, was something they hadn't dared to hope for. But here, in this dilapidated alley, surrounded by faces that had seen too much hardship, hope was rekindled. With his resolve firmly in place, Trump turned to his team. "This journey doesn't end here. This is only the beginning," he said with conviction, knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of responsibility, and the weight of possibility. As Donald Trump left the dilapidated house, the world outside felt different. The once distant hum of the city seemed so far away now, and the noise of the motorcade rolling through the streets had become muted by the raw, heavy silence that lingered in the alley behind him. It wasn't just the rundown buildings or the faces etched with exhaustion that stuck with him. It was the feeling that he had stepped into something far larger than he had anticipated. The families he had just encountered weren't just statistics, they were real people, with real stories, many of them deeply personal and heartbreaking. And as he looked out at the crowd that had gathered, there was no turning back. The eyes of these people were watching him, not as a politician or a businessman, but as someone who had stepped into their world, seen their struggles, and promised to do something about it. It wasn't enough to simply help one family. That much was clear to him now. He had made a promise, and as the crowd gathered, he knew this was just the beginning of a larger mission. It wasn't just about Lily or her mother anymore. This was about all the families who had been forgotten, families like those who had served their country and were now left to pick up the pieces. Trump's mind shifted from the immediate needs of Lily and her family to a larger vision. How could he, with all his resources and influence, create real, lasting change for these people? How could he help an entire community of forgotten families, struggling just to survive, let alone thrive? Turning back toward his advisors, Trump's voice rang with determination. We need to act now. No more waiting. We have to mobilize, and we have to do it quickly. His words were firm, but not cold. They were driven by a sense of urgency that matched the gravity of the situation. He didn't need a report about the families here, he already knew the struggle. He needed action, and he needed it now. As Trump walked through the crowd, the atmosphere had shifted. People were starting to gather around him, their eyes filled with a cautious hope. They had seen too many politicians pass through their neighborhoods with promises that were never kept. They had heard the same empty rhetoric over and over again. But this time, something was different. It wasn't just words. It was action. For the first time in a long while, these people felt like someone was actually paying attention, and that someone wasn't just passing through. He was staying. This isn't just the story of one family, Trump called out to the crowd, his voice carrying. This is the story of thousands. Thousands of families who have been forgotten, and who have been left to fend for themselves. I'm here to tell you that we will change that. We will make sure that no one, especially the families of those who sacrificed everything for this country, will ever be forgotten again. The crowd stirred. At first, the applause was hesitant, unsure, but as his words sank in, more and more people began to clap. Their faces, once lined with skepticism, slowly began to soften. A spark of hope had been lit, and for the first time, it felt like something real could happen. This wasn't just another photo op, this wasn't just another empty promise. This was something people could believe in. Trump turned to his team, his voice clear and resolute. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. We're going to start something here that will change lives. And it doesn't stop with one neighborhood. It doesn't stop with one family. We're going to bring real help to every person who needs it. As he spoke, he knew that the journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he also knew that it was a journey worth taking. The faces around him, those tired, weary faces of people who had given up hope, were now filled with something new. It was a small thing, but in that moment, it was enough: hope. Real hope. And that hope, fueled by action, would soon set off a chain reaction that would change not just one neighborhood but the entire country. For the first time, Trump truly understood the power of one small act. It wasn't the grand speeches or the lavish promises that made the difference, it was the willingness to show up, to face the hard truths, and to do something about them. It wasn't just about politics. It was about people. And that was something he could get behind, wholeheartedly. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the slum, the energy in the crowd shifted. What had begun as a small, hesitant group of onlookers was now an energized assembly of people whose lives had been marked by struggle and forgotten promises. The initial uncertainty in their eyes had slowly been replaced by something else, a glimmer of hope. The same hope that Trump had seen in Lily's eyes when she first told him her story. It was the kind of hope that comes when you've been knocked down so many times that you no longer expect help, but then, out of nowhere, someone shows up and makes a promise that things will be different this time. Trump knew that what he had just started was bigger than one family, bigger than just Lily and her mother. This was a movement in the making. Standing in front of those weary faces, he realized that this wasn't just about providing immediate relief, it was about giving them something they hadn't had in a long time: dignity. It was about showing them that they weren't forgotten, that they mattered, that they were worth investing in. It wasn't just about feeding them or providing them shelter for a night, it was about changing the system, about ensuring that every single person in that community, and the countless others like it across the country, had the opportunity to thrive. And Trump knew that if he was going to make good on his promise, he had to do more than just talk. He had to act. "This isn't just about a handout," Trump said, his voice strong as he addressed the growing crowd. "This is about building something sustainable. This is about lifting people up, giving them the tools to take care of themselves and their families. We're going to create opportunities, real opportunities, for you to succeed, to have the kind of life you deserve. And we're going to do it together." For the first time, the crowd started to respond, their voices growing louder. A few people began to clap, then more, until the applause had built to a roaring cheer. It was as if a switch had been flipped. They had been living in the shadows for so long, waiting for someone to notice them, to listen, to take them seriously. And now, here was Trump, not just as a figure of power, but as someone who had stepped into their world, taken their pain seriously, and was promising to bring real change. Trump's advisors stood behind him, a little shocked by the response. They hadn't expected the reaction to be so immediate, so powerful. But Trump wasn't surprised. He had always known that people wanted more than just promises, they wanted action. They wanted someone to stand with them, not just talk at them. And in that moment, standing in front of these families, Trump knew that the time for action was now. He didn't just want to be remembered for his wealth or his political power, he wanted to be remembered for changing lives, for giving people the chance to live with dignity and hope. As the applause continued to echo in the alley, Trump turned to his team. "We're starting something big here. But this isn't going to be a one-time deal. This is just the beginning. I want every resource we have put to work for these people. Housing, education, healthcare, job training, everything. And we're going to make sure that no one falls through the cracks again." The people in the crowd cheered again, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just gratitude, they were beginning to believe in the possibility of something better. They had been told so many times that they were invisible, that their struggles didn't matter. But now, they were seeing a different story unfold. They were seeing that someone cared, someone powerful enough to make real change happen. And for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel something they hadn't felt in years: hope. For Trump, that moment of connection with the crowd was powerful. He knew that change wasn't going to come easy, that the road ahead would be filled with challenges and obstacles. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. The work had just begun, but he was determined to see it through. This wasn't just about one community, it was about the future of the entire country, and Trump had just taken the first step toward making that future brighter for everyone, one promise at a time. The story of Lily and her mother wasn't just a story of hardship, it became a turning point, not only for their lives but for a community that had long been ignored. When Trump first stopped his motorcade to listen to their story, it was a small act, almost insignificant in the grand scope of his life. But that moment changed everything. It ignited a flame of compassion, not just in him, but in thousands of others who had been waiting for someone to acknowledge their struggles. This story teaches us a powerful lesson: sometimes, the smallest acts can spark the biggest changes. It's not about making grand gestures or promises we can't keep, it's about showing up when it matters most and doing something real, even if it's just one small step at a time. In today's world, where it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the constant noise of social media, politics, and everyday life, we often forget the power of human connection. We forget that one person standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity, can make a difference. Lily's simple act of holding up a sign asking for help was the catalyst for something bigger than anyone could have imagined. Her courage to ask for help, to speak out, brought about a movement that changed lives. This is a lesson for all of us. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that we're too small to make a difference, that our actions won't matter in the grand scheme of things. But the truth is, every small act of kindness, every step we take to help someone else, is a building block for change. It might not always be easy. It might not always be convenient. But when we stand up, when we show compassion, we give others permission to do the same. So, what can we learn from this story? It's not just about waiting for someone else to make a change. It's about being the change we want to see in the world. Lily didn't wait for someone to come to her, she took action, and that one act rippled out to create a movement of hope. If we all take small steps, together, we can build a world where no one is left behind. This story reminds us that even in our most challenging times, we have the power to change everything. It starts with one simple action.